Once, just one sentence slipped from her son's lips, a sentence more wounding than anything that had come before in all her years. "If you want to keep living in this house, I need you to transfer the deed to me and Susan." That moment pierced Evelyn Miller like a cold, sharp pin pressed right to her heart. The love she'd poured into raising her son loved tender as sunlight, fierce as storm, collided with the quiet strength and pride she'd built her life on. Between those two, something inside her, subtle and deep, began to shatter. She felt it, knew it. Not a single tear showed, but something crucial cracked in the quiet. Evelyn's home was a weathered, two-story wooden house nestled in the hills just outside the town of Asheville, North Carolina, built 50 years ago, every board holding a lifetime's worth of stories. She lived there alone now, but the walls echoed with memories, laughter, tears, warmth from family long gone. Evelyn and her late husband, Walter, had poured their lives into that place. Yes, they started from nothing. No nest egg, barely enough for groceries some weeks, but together they rebuilt the house bit by bit, always clutching hope tight. Winters so cold the wind found its way through every crack and made the floors creak at night. Springs when the rain slipped through a leaky roof and she'd set out pans to catch it. Still, all the best parts of her life, every joy and hardship grew from those rooms. In her younger days, Evelyn labored at a busy textile plant, the kind where you'd show up before sunrise and not get home till well after dark. She'd leave the house at 7 a.m. and sometimes, if the machines didn't break, stagger home just before 8 p.m., hands raw from work. 12 long hours, every day, no matter if Carolina humidity pressed sweat into her clothes, or if winter's chill bit through to her bones. Her fingers always wore bandages. Sometimes she'd barely notice the snags and nicks until evening. Bruises on her shoulders from carrying heavy bolts of fabric were permanent as freckles. The hardest thing, though, was never the toil or the cold calluses. It was losing the baby she carried, right toward the end. When exhaustion and stress finally overwhelmed her body's strength, nothing in her life before or since had left a wound as silent and lasting. Evelyn never spoke of that loss, not to Walter, not to anyone. It lived in her heart's deepest corners. Walter's health was poor, he couldn't keep a steady job, and holding that family together remained Evelyn's burden alone. But she never once uttered, "I can't do this," never even hinted. She believed, deep down, "As long as my boy grows up healthy, that's enough for me." With that one belief, she cut every corner, pinched every penny, labored from morning till night for years. Walter died suddenly from a heart attack, just a week before his 60th birthday, and days before he was set to retire. He'd just been talking, smiling about how, once his last day came, maybe they'd take a trip somewhere warm, see the ocean. 3 days later, Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, staring in silence at the empty chair he always used. There wasn't time for grief. When the world seemed to collapse, Evelyn squared her back and focused on raising their son, Michael, as best she could. "I just want him to go to college. That's what matters." That hope kept her on track. The thought of Michael walking across a stage, diploma in hand, made every morning worth starting over. She worked days at the mill. At night, she took in sewing hemming pants, fixing neighbors' dresses, anything to make a little extra. Saturdays, she cleaned houses for folks who never saw her as more than a quiet helper. Anything to set aside enough money. Most years, she spent hardly anything on herself. Maybe a few dollars for socks, maybe a cup of coffee as a treat once in a while. She never bought new clothes. She could hardly remember eating in a restaurant, even on her birthday. She'd tucked away the simple gold wedding ring Walter gave her the one piece of jewelry she ever owned at all. But when times got hard and bills stacked to the ceiling, she pawned it. And the ring never made its way back home. Through it all, she stayed grounded by a single, unwavering wish. Just let this child have a better, easier life than I did. The neighbors would sometimes ask, "How's your husband, Evelyn?" She'd always smile politely and say, "Walter's right here with me, that's what I believe." Though his grave rested nearly 40 miles away, nestled in the quiet folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains, for Evelyn, His presence was never far. His picture on the shelf. The echo of his laughter when she poured a cup of coffee in the quiet dawn. Time ticked on. Michael grew up, married a kind woman named Susan. On their wedding day, Evelyn offered her blessing freely, with warmth and joy, even rolling out an old family recipe for homemade apple pie, her hands shaking. Just a little with nerves and pride. Again and again, she told herself, this is what I've been working toward. This is why I sacrificed. When she welcomed Susan, she truly believed, now I can trust someone else to care for him. But as the years rolled by, something shifted in Michael. Where once there was gentle kindness, he'd ask, "Ma, are you warm enough?" Or, "Let me bring you a blanket." He grew oddly distant. He'd glance past her at the dinner table, or answer her questions with a distracted hum, eyes fixed on his phone. They rarely dined together anymore. Often, Susan barely acknowledged Evelyn after work, giving just the faintest nod before retreating to her own room. One evening, Evelyn was alone in the kitchen, stirring a pot of homemade soup, listening to the house settle around her. Michael hadn't said a real word all day. Susan's steps faded down the hallway, door closing softly behind her. Evelyn looked at her wrinkled hands and quietly wondered, do I even belong here anymore? It wasn't a complaint. Not really. Just the gentle nudge of a doubt that had taken root in her heart. Still, even so, she would softly reassure herself, it'll be all right. I'm probably reading into things. I have a place here. But what Evelyn didn't yet know, couldn't have imagined in that lonely moment, was that all those anxieties were about to become real and certain. She had no idea, not then, that the day would soon come when she'd have to make the hardest choice of her life. That her courage was about to be tested in a way she had never known before. That was still in the future. In that quiet kitchen, alone with the memories and the simmering soup, Evelyn simply let her thoughts drift, searching for a bit of peace, even as the shape of the coming storm began to gather outside those old wooden walls. There was a time, not so long ago, when laughter bounced through this old house every night. Back then, you could hear the high, clear peal of young voices over the clatter of pots and pans in the kitchen. Evelyn would be at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, pretending not to notice as Michael, her son, all bright eyes and boundless curiosity, snuck glances around the door. "What's for dinner, Mom?" he'd ask, sniffing the air, always searching for the hint of something familiar, something warm. There was a rhythm to those nights. They ate together, talked about old stories, and even the silence felt companionable, filled with life. But tonight, everything seemed different. As Evelyn stood at the kitchen counter, she could only hear the somber tick of the clock on the wall. Its sound stretched long and slow, heavy as winter dusk. Every other noise had been smothered in quiet, so much so that even her own breath sounded too loud, as if the house itself were holding its breath. That night, sometime after midnight, Evelyn woke with a start and shuffled through the dark house to use the bathroom. As she passed Michael and Susan's bedroom, the soft curve of her daughter-in-law's voice slipped through the crack beneath their door. Though muffled, the bitterness seeped out clear. "I just can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, Michael, but having her here? It's like the whole house smells like old people all the time. I can't stand it. It's just too much. I feel like I'm going crazy." There was a pause, then a choked, half-stifled sob, a voice that quivered with frustration and a hint of fury. Evelyn didn't need to wonder who was on the other end of that late-night venting. She stood there in the dark hallway, hidden by shadow, heart pounding so hard she worried they'd hear it through the closed door. She'd never thought her very presence could be such a burden, something so resented, spoken of behind walls like a shameful secret. Hadn't Susan always smiled at the dinner table saying, "Thank you for everything"? Really? Had all those words been nothing but duty, nothing but air? In that moment, Evelyn felt an exhaustion rise up from her legs, as if the floor itself was giving way beneath her. Morning came, brisk and colorless as old bones. Evelyn did what she'd always done. She got up, tied her apron, and began making breakfast: scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and, out of habit, a big pot of coffee. As she stirred, Michael walked in, the tension in his shoulders hidden behind gentle words. "Mom, Susan hasn't been feeling too well lately. Would you be okay spending more time downstairs? Maybe avoid the upstairs for a while, just until she gets back on her feet?" His tone was soft, almost apologetic, never harsh or demanding. Still, Evelyn heard what was unsaid. It all echoed last night's conversation. The one not meant for her. Her heart tightened, a ripple of unease running underneath the gentle surface of the words. She managed only, "Of course. I understand," because what else could she say? It wasn't in her to protest, not really. Not when she'd already realized, deep down, that this wasn't just a passing issue. This was deliberate, and things were shifting, maybe for good. From that day, Evelyn felt the space between herself and the others stretch, little by little. Meals grew silent and short. Michael began spending more and more evenings alone in his room, door closed, phone screen glowing through the cracks. Susan avoided her gaze in the hallway, choosing instead to linger at the kitchen sink, staring at the yard through the window as if it offered some escape. Even the television's drone couldn't reach the cold corners of the living room anymore. One night, after they ate quietly, each person lost in thought, Evelyn sat in her favorite recliner, half watching the evening news. Her phone buzzed with a new notification, a message in their family group chat. She tapped the screen, not expecting much. The sender was Susan. The message was short, ugly, unmistakable. "Ugh. I can't believe the old woman is still alive. I swear, she's driving me insane." For one long moment, blackness swept across her vision. Her hands trembled, unable to tell if this was an accident, a cruel joke, or a message sent with full intention. Without a word, she placed the phone gently on the end table and pushed herself to her feet, every muscle heavy with sorrow. Down the hall, Evelyn paused outside Michael's closed door. Voices muffled by drywall spilled into the silence. Honestly, if she wasn't here, we could sell this place right now and move to that new condo near the lake. All we have to do is take care of the paperwork, just change the deed, and we're free. It's a mess with her here. "Yeah," she heard Michael reply, voice low and flat. "I know. As soon as her name's off the deed, it'll go a lot faster. She's the reason it's such a headache." Evelyn couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this a dream? A trick of a restless mind? No. This was real. Her own son, her grown child, and his wife, planning to erase her from this place. To turn her home, the home she built with Walter, into something to be sold to the highest bidder. My house, she thought. The life Walter and I carved out year after year, just to keep this roof over our heads. All of that, just meaningless now. 30 years of work, and to them, it's nothing but a name on a piece of paper. That night, Evelyn crawled into bed and stared up at the ceiling for hours, unable to close her aching eyes. Every phrase she'd overheard. "We don't need her anymore. She's a burden. We could sell," stuck like thorns in her heart, each one sharp and unforgettable. The next morning, Evelyn moved quietly through her morning ritual. Going through the motions almost out of muscle memory, she brewed coffee, tried to whip up some blueberry pancakes, burned the first batch, and couldn't remember if she'd put sugar in the second. At the table, she found she had no appetite, pushing her food around her plate without taking a single bite. Later, gathering the mail, Evelyn found a familiar envelope from the town tax office, her annual property tax notice, a bill reminding her of what she still owned. She held it in her hands and wondered, as long as the house is in my name, maybe I can protect it. But what's the point now? Do I still have anything left to protect? In that plain white envelope was not just a tax bill, but the memory of all the struggles, the sacrifice, the pride she once took in keeping her family and this old house together. And now, at this crossroads, Evelyn's heart filled with doubts about where she belonged, whom she could trust, and whether home was even hers anymore. But that night, after a warm shower, Evelyn happened to catch her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The image startled her, a much smaller figure than she remembered. Her shoulders narrower, the line of her back a little stooped. Strands of her hair glimmered pale and silver under the soft light. "So this is what I've come to look like now," she whispered, a gentle sorrow settling in her chest. Yet even as she looked, one thing remained unchanged. Her eyes, they still held that same old spark, maybe softer, but no less fierce. "I'm not here just to be thrown away," Evelyn told herself, gripping the edge of the sink, willing her voice and soul to steady. She let those words echo in her mind, soaking them in, until resolve slowly began to root itself in her heart. Sometimes, a single sentence is enough to break a person, and sometimes, one night, just one, can lend someone the strength to start again. For Evelyn Miller, that turning point was drawing close, much closer than she could have imagined. In the first few days of March, on a chilly morning when frost still clung to the windows, Evelyn was in the kitchen reheating a pot of chicken noodle soup for breakfast, her favorite comfort food. Footsteps sounded behind her, and Michael, her son, appeared in the doorway. He held a thin stack of papers, a look of careful intent on his face. "Mom, could you take a look at these for me?" Michael asked casually, holding out an envelope. Susan stood across the hall listening but said nothing. Evelyn dried her hands on a dish towel and accepted the envelope without fuss. She flipped through the first few pages, her eyes catching the heavy, official stamp, and then the words, "Real Estate Title Transfer Agreement, Grantor, Evelyn Miller, Recipient, Michael and Susan Miller." Her hands went cold. "Would you be willing to transfer the house title over to us?" Michael said. He spoke gently, politely, his smile soft. "You can keep living here, Mom. Nothing changes about that. It's just, for paperwork and planning, it'd be easier if we go ahead and sort it out now while everything's calm." Every word was tender, each one phrased with the surface polish of care, almost loving, almost considerate. And still, a chill spread beneath those manners. Evelyn heard something deeper, something off. Michael's tone was certain, not asking a question, but assuming the answer. She felt the unspoken pressure, the sense of, "This signature is just routine. You'll do it, won't you?" Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly on the edge of the form. Her voice came out small, uncertain. "This house, it's still under my name. Your father and I, we built this place together. Spent decades taking care of every inch. This is our home." Michael's face flickered, cloudy for just a split second. "Of course, Mom. And we're grateful for everything. Really, we are. But Susan and I, we have to think about the future too. If you care about us, please help us by signing. It would mean a lot." To Evelyn, it felt like refusing would mark her as selfish, lacking in love. As if the only right course was to give in. A deep, icy ache crept through her chest. For 30 years, she'd given thanks just for being able to hear the word. Thank you. 30 years of raising Michael, of chipped and battered hands, of aching knees and back, of waking to fix the roof so rain wouldn't leak in, of sleepless nights when Michael had fever. She remembered each of those days, all the hardships, all the private victories threatened now, to be wiped clean with a single signature. "Let me think about it for a little while," she managed, her voice just above a whisper. Gently, she handed the paperwork back and stepped out of the room. She didn't sign. She couldn't. Not yet. A few days slipped past, each quieter than the last. One afternoon, while dusting the living room shelves and putting away boxes in the back closet, Evelyn wandered into the little room off the hall. It was the one she'd always called the memory room. There, in the past, stood a simple pine bookshelf, topped with Walter's framed photograph, her late husband, with his kind, laughing eyes. Now, his picture was gone. Panic rose in her throat. She rummaged quickly through the drawers of the old chest where she kept precious things: Walter's silver watch, a wedding present, a shoebox of black and white photos from their anniversary, the letters he wrote her every Christmas. All of it gone, every piece. Shaken, she hurried to the kitchen, where Susan was chopping vegetables for dinner, fuming under her breath. Evelyn swallowed, then asked, "Susan, do you know where Walter's picture went? Or his old watch and those family photos? I can't find them anywhere." Susan's face remained placid, almost dismissive. "Oh? Those old things? I went ahead and got rid of them. They're kind of outdated, you know. I figured it was time." They just took up space around here, and honestly, we need the room. All the air seemed to leave Evelyn's body. She could barely breathe. Her throat closed tight. Her heart shook as if caught in a storm. Why? Why didn't you ask me first? Her words crumbled and collapsed, tears springing loose without permission. That night, when she went to her bedroom, a strange unease nagged at her. The doorknob felt oddly stiff. Evelyn tried her key, but it wouldn't turn. After several failed tries, she managed to open the door. Stepping inside, she noticed something new, a fresh, unfamiliar lock installed from the inside. It stared at her like a warning she didn't understand. The next morning over breakfast, she quietly broached the question to Michael. "Did you change the lock on my bedroom door?" He nodded, offering a bland smile. "Oh, that? Yeah, just to be safe. There've been some break-ins close by lately. I want to make sure you're protected, Mom." Evelyn did not press him. Her words failed because deep down, she knew what had changed. This wasn't her room anymore. This house, the house she'd built and poured her soul into, was no longer a place where she belonged. The knowledge settled in her heart like a heavy stone. But things didn't stop there. Just a few days later, a call arrived, a number Evelyn didn't recognize, her old home phone rattling on the side table. With a puzzled frown, she picked it up. "Hello, this is Evelyn Miller." A polite, unfamiliar voice on the other end. "Good afternoon, Ms. Zier." "Miller, sorry for intruding. This is Brian from Johnson Realty. I was wondering about your house. We've been notified that you might be ready to sell soon, and I'd love to talk you through the process." Evelyn's pulse hammered. "Sell? I haven't spoken with anyone about selling my house. Not at all." A faint pause. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. That's just what your family told us, that you'd agreed to it." Her hand shook. She felt the ground under her feet give. Her family, her only son, had begun making plans for her life, her home, and her history, all without asking, all without her voice in the matter. In that moment, Evelyn realized the walls closing in were not just the house, but the space her family was giving, her shrinking with each passing day. She set the phone down gently, feeling both afraid and strangely resolute. This was the moment she had been drifting toward, even through all the days of quiet patience and silent hopes. It was time for Evelyn to decide. Was she going to give everything up quietly? Or would she reclaim her dignity? Her pride and her future, one deliberate step at a time? Even after Evelyn set the phone back down in its cradle, she could not stop the trembling in her hands. A fine, stubborn quiver ran through her palms, reaching clear into her chest. "They're moving forward with selling the house?" she thought. "I haven't even been told a thing. Not by Michael, not by Susan." It hit her all at once, sharp and cold. This place I have cared for, this home, is not really mine any longer. The truth of it pressed on her, making her heart beat faster. That night, lying on top of her old quilt in the dark, Evelyn listened to the hum of the house and remembered Walter's voice, deep and reassuring, steady as a rock. "You're the heart of this home, Ev," he'd said years ago. She had believed him. She'd pledged to keep that home safe with all she had, to make it her legacy. But now, the walls seemed thinner, the memories smaller, and all she could feel was how easily her world might be swept away, sold, with the stroke of a pen, for someone else's investment. Her mind circled a strange, bitter thought. Her name mattered here only for the deed, only for the signature, not for her presence, not for her love. In this house, she was no longer needed. In fact, maybe she was in the way. So what am I supposed to do now? She wondered, her chest tight. And as the dark pressed in and the room grew colder, a new word quietly took root inside her: separation. Not loud or sudden, but real and sudden as a winter wind. Once, years ago, Michael's hand was so small it could barely wrap around her thumb. He used to hold tight, clinging to her for comfort, for safety. Now, her grown son could not even look at her. He sat in silence across the dinner table or stood in the hallway, eyes fixed on the floor whenever she passed. He said nothing, week after week, as though his mother had vanished. That silence was heavier than anger, sharper than any words. It wedged itself right into Evelyn's heart. Late that same night, after all lights had dimmed except for a low lamp in the living room, she overheard voices, Susan and Michael talking, not even bothering to whisper. The TV had been shut off. In the hush, Susan's voice slid out, calm but cold. Look, I'm not saying we have to kick her out right now, but honestly, once she gets too sick or something, she can just move into some sort of nursing home or assisted living place. Taking care of her isn't our job. The words struck Evelyn like cold needles, pricking beneath her skin, deeper than she wanted to admit. But what hurt her even worse was Michael's reaction, or rather, his lack of one. He did not argue. He did not protest. He just sat there quietly, eyes fixed on the floor, saying nothing at all, listening to his wife talk about his mother as if she was a problem to dispose of, just another stranger. In that moment, Evelyn felt an emptiness she hadn't known before. I do not exist for my own son, she realized. She wished he would argue, yell, defend her, anything, but instead, he just faded away into silence. Being rejected hurt, of course. But to be ignored, to feel erased from your own family by the ones you had once, loved more than your own self, that stripped away her very sense of worth. Shivering in her own room, Evelyn curled herself up as tight as she could in her bed, pulling a thick blanket up past her chin. A draft slipped in around the edges of the old window pane she'd meant to fix that last spring, but the chill in the house tonight came from somewhere deeper than the air outside. It came from within the walls, from the way no one in the house seemed to care anymore. No matter how much she had poured into this home, no matter night after night of patience and sacrifice, it seemed that in the end, she would just become invisible, an afterthought, something already gone. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Michael's footsteps, slow and clumsy. He sounded unsteady, maybe a little tipsy, passing through the kitchen. In the stillness, his low voice floated through her closed bedroom door. She held her breath to hear. She can't really do anything. She doesn't have it in her to leave, not really, he muttered, as if confiding only to himself. We all know that. As she pieced together what those words meant, Evelyn felt something inside her shatter and slip away into the darkness. All these years, she had trusted with her whole heart, that Michael would always be on her side. No matter what happened, surely her only son would protect her. She had never let go of her pride as a mother, or the deep, stubborn love she felt for her child. But now she saw herself not as a parent to be cherished, but as a burden to endure, a test to be passed. Did she have the guts to leave? Was she just an old woman hanging on? It was as though Michael was weighing the worth of keeping her around by whether or not she'd fight to stay. A cruel merit for someone who had once been the center of his whole world. At last, Evelyn rose from her bed, her heart buzzing with fear and strange determination. The house was hushed, the only sounds a distant hum from the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the old clock in the hall. She tiptoed into the kitchen, wrapped her hands around a mug of warm water, and let herself wonder, her voice nearly silent. Am I going to cling to this place out of fear? Or will I finally find the courage to move forward on my own? She suspected she already knew the answer. The next morning, before her alarm had even rung, Evelyn was up, dressed and ready. In the first cold light, while Michael and Susan still slept, she stood before the bathroom mirror and looked herself in the eyes. Deep within, behind lines of fatigue and gray, something indomitable shined back at her. I am not finished, not yet. And that was not just rebellion for its own sake. It was something new, the first awakening of a quiet resolve, the beginning of the journey to reclaim her dignity, her life, and her pride. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt hope tiny, flickering, but unmistakable, take root again inside her chest. Evelyn reached up and turned the page on the living room calendar, her bright, red marker boxing in important dates and scribbled notes for the month ahead. She checked over each one, reading them quietly to herself. County Clerk's Office on Tuesday. The Land Records Department on Thursday. Later, a meeting at the local Senior Resource Center. Every visit, Evelyn reminded herself, was about her own preparations now. No longer for Michael or Susan. This time, she was laying the groundwork for her own future, her own choices, her own safety. On the dining table, beside a fraying placemat, rested an empty glass. It had sat untouched since last night's quiet dinner. Soft afternoon light caught the faintest smudges. Evelyn's fingerprints pressed. On the base, a silent echo of what was said and left unsaid only hours before. The glass rested there, a tiny witness to heavy words flung carelessly, their meaning still sharp in the air. Evelyn did not rush to clean it away. She simply sat, watched the sunlight trace the rim, and let herself feel the sorrow for as long as she needed. That evening, after the hush of the house had settled like a thick quilt and the only sound was the wind shaking through old oak trees outside, Evelyn reached for her fountain pen. She gently set out a piece of stationery, pale blue and lined, and wrote a letter by the lamplight. Careful, slow, steady enough so the ink wouldn't smudge. Your silence was all the answer I needed. From here on, I can no longer be your mother. Starting now, I will walk this path as a person of my own. When she finished, Evelyn tucked the folded letter into a plain white envelope and quietly slid it into the very bottom drawer of her old pine dresser. Once, that drawer had been crowded with treasures: Walter's photograph, old birthday cards, her wedding band in a faded blue box. The photo was gone now, thrown away in Susan's latest bout of tidying, but in Evelyn's heart, the shape of Walter lingered nearby. His voice, soft and warm, drifted in her memory. She knelt by the dresser, closed her eyes and whispered, "If you were here, Walter, you'd tell me to go. You always wanted me to stand tall, didn't you? I hope you can still help me find the strength to do this." Alone, in the deep midnight stillness, Evelyn mouthed a farewell in her heart. Not out loud, never that loud, but clear, and for herself alone. She felt the relief and ache woven together, as if the space left by her old life might yet be filled by something new. She was preparing to step forward at last. Before the sun had fully broken through the Carolina fog the next morning, Evelyn was standing at her front door, a small rolling suitcase in hand. The air was heavy with pre-dawn hush, not a bird sang in the sleepy neighborhood. Inside the case were a few simple changes of clothes, her toothbrush and hairbrush, and only the most important things: her bank card, a bus ticket, and the letter she'd written the night before. She knew without question she might never return to this house, but the strange weight that had pressed on her chest for years was suddenly, quietly, gone. She did not cry. It wasn't that her feelings had dried up. It was more. For the first time in decades, the chains of duty and self-sacrifice, the roles forced on her by everyone else, had fallen away. Evelyn left the door unlocked. She figured Michael and Susan would eventually wake and notice. Maybe they'd wonder where she'd gone. Evelyn decided she owed them no explanation and certainly no apologies. They'd had all the chances she knew to give. As she left her home behind, she repeated to herself, "This silence is my answer." Her first stop, after wheeling her suitcase onto the 7:30 city bus, was the county courthouse downtown. She'd read up on the paperwork herself. She took a number and sat waiting in the hard plastic chair, running through the steps in her mind, file the new restriction on her property title, hand in the form with the official phrase, "No sale or transfer shall be valid without my written, in-person consent." When her number was called, Evelyn stood straight and steady at the counter. Her hand only trembled a little as she carefully signed her name at the bottom of the legal document. After a moment, she let out her breath. At least now, she told herself, they can't just sell the house out from under me. The certainty, even if a small comfort, let her stand a bit taller in her shoes. Her next destination was a law office near the park, where she'd booked an appointment days ago with a woman attorney, Paula Martinez, whose kind voice over the phone had steadied Evelyn's nerves. Paula greeted her with a gentle smile, invited her to a private meeting room, and then got right to business. "I'd like to write a will," Evelyn said, with no hesitation now. "I know exactly what I want it to say." She listed it all, what she'd managed to save from decades in the Milher retirement account, A modest IRA, the last of her checking, every penny that could be cashed out. In total, it wasn't much by city standards, maybe about $30,000. But Evelyn had made a choice. Every bit would go to a cause close to her heart, a grant Evelyn set up herself, this support fund for senior women living alone. Something to help other women who found themselves disregarded by the ones they'd raised, or who needed a second chance after losing everything they'd worked for. I know there are so many others out there, women like me, left alone, wondering what's left, she told Paula quietly, tears bright but unfallen in her eyes. If all my regrets and all my sadness can somehow be turned into hope for someone else, then maybe it was worth living through. Paula's smile was warm as spring, and Evelyn felt a deep lightness settle around her. She realized she was no longer looking backward at lost years, but forward, toward whoever might need a small piece of help. At the end, Evelyn produced the letter she'd written for Michael, just one envelope out of her suitcase, pressed between her hands and handed to Paula for safekeeping. "This is the only thing I want my son to have," she explained. "If anything happens to me, you'll know when to send it." The note was simple. Inside, she'd written, "I forgive you, Michael. But I am not a fool. If you forget the one who raised you, you have thrown away your own pride. I won't recount the story of how I gave you everything I had. I have no need to. That time is gone. Remember only this. Choosing silence is the last act of love, your mother's final gift. May you find your own way in this world, even if I'm not beside you. Mom, Evelyn Miller." Without fanfare, Evelyn zipped her suitcase, stepped out into the soft morning, and let the door to that old life close gently behind her. Her feet were a little sore and her hands ached with age, but her heart, at last, was her own again. She carried her life forward, step by steady step, walking toward a future she would shape for herself. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt her own pride again, not as a mother, or a shadow in someone else's home, but as a person finally, gloriously free. When Evelyn Miller set her pen down and folded the letter she had just finished, the clock told her it was late afternoon. She glanced up, noticing the gentle sunlight that filtered through the blinds, painting thin golden stripes across the wood floor of her small rented room. Outside, the first buds of dogwood trees were beginning to soften and split, splashing pale pink and ivory along the curb beyond the window. Spring was surely on the way. Quiet, then suddenly sweeping in, just as it always had in this part of the country. Inside, a new kind of spring was coming too. Evelyn herself, who had for so long lived for someone else's needs, someone else's expectations, someone else's timetable, was on the edge of her own new beginning. That night, Evelyn found herself in the unfamiliar quiet of a budget hotel room, one of those neat, boxy motels you see lined up along the highways that lead out of city centers, rooms stacked one atop the other, each just big enough for a slim bed, a small table, and a set of faded curtains. As evening came, she drew the curtains closed, set out a simple meal of a ham and cheese sandwich and a bowl of chicken noodle. Soup, no restaurant fare, but nourishing, and hers alone. She bowed her head, quietly saying grace, hands folded in her lap, before the untouched meal. It wasn't a feast, not in any outward way. Still, in that tiny pause, with no demands from anyone, no accusations, no careful tiptoeing, Evelyn felt a warmth bloom inside her chest. For the first time in so many years, she felt peace. True, solid peace that belonged only to her. She relished that sacred silence, savoring every breath of it. "At last," she whispered softly, her own voice carrying gently through the room. "Can breathe again." The words seemed to echo deep in her heart. She sat for a while in calm and stillness, letting the sense of freedom fill her from the inside out. Had she made the right choice in coming here? What would the future look like? She didn't know. No one could know for certain. The only thing sure was this: the decision had been hers, her own will, her voice, unclaimed by anyone else. That small, simple fact, her first true act for herself, could not be taken away by any hand or any word. Exhausted by the week's wait, Evelyn tucked herself into the crisp motel sheets and drifted into the deepest, most complete sleep she'd known in years. She rested unafraid, not listening for footsteps behind a door, not worrying about hushed voices or tilted glances at the dinner table. Just the soft hum of the air conditioner and the rhythm of her own breathing promised safety. 3 months would pass before Evelyn truly settled again. By May, she had moved her few bags into a modest, single-room apartment just beyond the city limits of Raleigh. The building was squat and weathered, brick softened by time and the southern rain. A half-mile down the road was a shady park, green and open, and a tiny branch of the public library, always quiet in the afternoons. It was the kind of neighborhood where folks greeted each other over small fences, where age brought not scorn but a nod of recognition. People knew Evelyn's story in broad strokes, but never pride. Many had stories of their own, after all. Every morning, she would open one small window, letting the breeze tug gently at the curtains. The sunlight fell sleepy and dappled on the battered floorboards. The stiff, crowded air of her old house was gone now. No more anxious silence pressed at her from every room. No more need to walk softly or avert her eyes. She greeted herself. "Good morning, Evelyn," she'd say out loud, just a soft, ordinary ritual. She set a kettle to boil, took out her favorite mug, and brewed a cup of tea for herself. She made breakfast simple, a slice of wheat toast, a little fruit, sometimes eggs if she felt like it. There was no one else's appetite to cater to, no need for fuss, no balancing acts required. The whole ritual belonged to her. And for Evelyn, this small, pleasure-making breakfast for no one but herself felt like the best sort of luxury, a grace she'd long denied. As dusk crept in and the world grew quiet again, Evelyn took up a new hobby, a class in calligraphy at the local senior center. She had never before dared to give shape and order to her own words, but now she found comfort guiding the black ink across paper, letting her hands grow steady and sure. Her teacher liked to say, "The words you write are a reflection of the life you've lived." Evelyn understood deeply what she meant. As her wrist and heart moved together, she could almost feel years of confusion, the old sorrow lingering at her edges, and even her anger gathering in the brush. She watched as her feelings poured out, slow and deliberate, onto the paper, leaving her lighter than before, the weight of those emotions melting with every word. One evening, the phrase that formed beneath her hand was this: "People may call me a forgiving mother, but I call myself a woman who chose her pride." Ordraces of Vaney. So many times in her past, she had swallowed herself for family, for peace, for some imagined duty. "Because I'm a mother," she'd been told. "Because I'm family. Just endure a bit more." No longer. She had discovered forgiveness was not blindly accepting every hurt or injustice, nor was it about erasing her own needs or history. True forgiveness, Evelyn now saw, was a kind of strength, a way to say goodbye to old pain and honor the life she still held. She didn't wait for Michael's return anymore, straining for the sound of his steps down the hall. She wasn't afraid of the sound of keys turning late at night. No, her nights were filled instead with music playing softly on the radio, with practiced movements over silky paper, with quiet conversations about the weather and the fresh blooms in the park outside. One afternoon at the library, she spotted a notice on the bulletin board: "Collecting stories. Voices of seniors living alone." Evelyn hesitated a moment, then took a card from the stack. She filled out her message simply, honestly. The love a mother gives her child can sometimes become a chain. You have the right to break that chain when it becomes too heavy. Before I am anyone's mother, I am always my own person. If you, who are listening to or reading these words now, know what it is to have wounded your mother, or perhaps you have lived your own years as a silent sacrifice for someone else, Evelyn hopes this story reaches you. She hopes you know it is not about vengeance, not about throwing bitterness into the past. No, it is only to remind those, in homes somewhere across this country, who are losing their voice. Yes, even now you can take the first step forward. If you are a mother, or if you were ever raised by one, Evelyn asks this of you. before your love turns against your own heart, before you shrink too small inside your own life. Pause. See yourself. Remember, a mother's love is not endless, but it is precious for that very reason. Beautiful, strong, and true, because it has limits. And so do you. That is what makes it worth cherishing, and what makes you worth cherishing too. Today, as always, Evelyn Miller sits with quiet focus, pen in hand, letting each deliberate stroke carry a silent wish forward. With every letter she forms, there's a gentle prayer in her heart. May these words be a spark of hope for someone, somewhere. What do you think, reader? How did Evelyn's choices make you feel? If your own mother ever swallowed her tears in silence, even for one moment, or if you yourself find echoes of your story in hers, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your truth, your experience, your voice. They matter here. And if Evelyn's story has touched you, if this journey stirs your own heart, consider clicking like and subscribe. Join us in supporting everyone who, like Evelyn, finds the courage to begin living again, to reclaim themselves one small step at a time. Thank you, truly, for listening all the way to the end. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, whenever the next chapter brings us together, know this, your story, too, is worth telling. Your hope, too, deserves to shine.